What if I told you that a single glance at a stranger's wrist would uncover a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of power and cost a father his life? What if that same billionaire who destroyed everything you loved was secretly the one keeping your family alive? And what if the truth you're about to discover will force you to choose between justice and survival? Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from, because this story happened closer to home than you might think. The fluorescent lights of Harper's Diner buzzed like angry wasps overhead, casting harsh shadows across the cracked vinyl booths that had seen better decades. At 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that would shatter everything Zara Mitchell thought she knew about her father's death, she wiped down table 12 for the third time, her calloused hands moving in mechanical circles while her mind wandered to the stack of overdue bills hidden beneath her mattress upstairs. 23 years old, and she already felt ancient, worn down by grief, debt, and the crushing weight of responsibility that had landed on her shoulders the night two police officers knocked on her door with news that would destroy her world. "Miss Mitchell, we're sorry to inform you that your father was found deceased. 2 years. 2 years since Louise Mitchell's body was discovered in that blood-soaked alley behind Murphy's gas station, his wallet missing, his grandfather's watch torn from his wrist by thieves who probably pawned it for drug money within hours. The police had called it a robbery gone wrong, another statistic in Austin's rising crime rate. Case closed, file buried, family forgotten. But Zara had never forgotten. She carried her father's memory like a scar across her heart, working double shifts at the diner to pay for her younger brother's college tuition because that's what Luis would have wanted. Education was everything to him. The key to escaping the cycle of poverty that had trapped 3 generations of Mitchells in Austin's struggling East Side. The breakfast crowd was the usual mix of construction workers grabbing coffee before dawn shifts, elderly regulars nursing their loneliness over endless refills, and the occasional business traveler who'd taken a wrong turn off I-35. Austin's East Side wasn't exactly a destination. It was a place people passed through on their way to somewhere better. Zara knew that feeling intimately. She'd been planning her own escape before her father died. Acceptance letter to UT's journalism program still pinned to her bedroom wall like a cruel joke. Dreams had a way of dying alongside the people who believed in them. "Zara, table 6 needs more syrup," called Rosie from behind the register, her weathered face creased with the kind of exhaustion that came from 30 years of serving coffee to ungrateful customers. At 62, Rosie Martinez was more mother than manager to the rotating cast of waitresses who worked Harper's Diner, offering advice and aspirin in equal measure. "On it," Zara replied, grabbing the sticky bottle from the service station. The maple syrup was probably corn syrup with artificial flavoring, but nobody who ate at Harper's was expecting gourmet. They came for cheap food, strong coffee, and the kind of anonymity that only existed in dive diners where everyone minded their own business. "Order up." Marco's gravelly voice cut through the morning chatter from behind the kitchen window. Steam rose from plates of eggs and hash browns as Zara balanced 3 dishes on her forearm with practiced ease. 2 years of waitressing had taught her to move like a dancer through the narrow spaces between tables, dodging elbows and purses and the occasional wandering hand from customers who thought a 20% tip bought them more than just service. The morning rush was predictable, almost soothing in its routine. Coffee refills every 10 minutes for Officer Patterson, who'd been working the graveyard shift for 15 years and had the hollow eyes to prove it. Extra bacon for Mrs. Chun, whose husband had died last spring and who ate breakfast at Harper's every day now because cooking for one felt too lonely. Light conversation with Tommy, the construction foreman who always sat at the counter and told the same stories about his glory days playing high school football. These people were Zara's world now, a small, safe circle of familiar faces who asked no questions about her past and expected nothing from her future. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was stable, predictable, safe. But nothing had prepared her for what walked through that door. The bell above the entrance chimed at exactly 7:12 a.m., and the entire diner seemed to hold its breath. She strode in like she owned the place. Hell, she probably could have bought the entire block with her pocket change. Tall, elegant, draped in a charcoal wool coat that cost more than Zara's car, she commanded attention without asking for it. Vivian Sterling. Even in Austin, Texas, 1,000 miles from the glittering towers of Manhattan where she'd built her empire. Everyone knew that name. Sterling hotels graced the skylines of New York, Los Angeles, Miami, and a dozen other cities where the wealthy went to see and be seen. A business empire built on luxury and exclusivity, catering to the kind of people who thought nothing of spending $1,000 on a single night stay. Forbes had called her the hospitality hurricane for the way she swept through markets and left competitors in ruins. Business journals wrote breathless profiles about her rise from middle-class obscurity to billionaire status. She was the American dream in designer clothing, proof that with enough ambition and ruthlessness, anyone could claw their way to the top. And she was sitting in Harper's Diner, sliding into booth 17 like she belonged there. What the hell was a billionaire doing in a place like this? Zara's hands trembled slightly as she approached with the coffee pot, hyper-aware of the sudden tension that had settled over the diner like a heavy blanket. The construction workers at table 6 had stopped their conversation mid-sentence to stare. Mrs. Chen looked up from her scrambled eggs with frank curiosity. Even Marco had stuck his head out of the kitchen window to get a look at their unlikely visitor. Up close, Vivian Sterling was even more intimidating than her magazine photos suggested. Sharp cheekbones that could cut glass, ice blue eyes that seemed to calculate the worth of everything they saw, silver hair pulled back in a perfect chignon that probably required an hour of professional styling every morning. She wore authority like other women wore perfume, invisible but unmistakable. There was something else too, something Zara couldn't quite put her finger on. A tension in Vivian's shoulders, a tightness around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. She looked like a woman carrying the weight of the world, though Zara couldn't imagine what burdens a billionaire might shoulder. Coffee, Zara managed, proud that her voice came out steady despite the surreal nature of the situation. Black. Vivian didn't look up from her phone, fingers flying across the screen with the efficiency of someone who made million-dollar decisions before most people had their first cup of caffeine. The device was the latest iPhone, encased in what looked like genuine leather, and probably cost more than Zara made in a month. As Zara poured, she tried to imagine what had brought Vivian Sterling to Austin's East Side. Business meetings were conducted in boardrooms and country clubs, not greasy diners that served coffee in chipped mugs. Maybe she was slumming it for some kind of publicity stunt, billionaire connects with the common people, that sort of thing. Or maybe she was researching locations for her next hotel development, though Harper's neighborhood was hardly prime real estate. But as the coffee streamed from the pot into Vivian's mug, Zara's eyes drifted to her wrist, and time stopped. The watch was impossible to miss. Rose gold with diamonds that caught the diner's harsh fluorescent lighting and threw it back like captured starlight. It was the kind of timepiece that graced the wrists of movie stars and oil barons, a piece of jewelry that cost more than most people's cars. But it wasn't the luxury that made Zara's blood turn to ice water in her veins. It was the small engraving on the side of the case. Tiny letters that she'd memorized during countless nights spent tracing them with her fingertip on cold metal in the morgue, when the police had let her see her father's belongings one last time before they were cataloged as evidence. For Luis, with love, 1998. Her father's watch. The Rolex Submariner that had been his most prized possession, passed down from his father and grandfather before him. The same watch that had been clutched in Louise Mitchell's dying hands 2 years ago when they found him bleeding out in that alley behind Murphy's gas station. The watch the police said had been stolen from his body after a robbery gone wrong, along with his wallet and the $43 he'd been carrying. The watch that was supposed to be locked away in some evidence locker, forgotten like her father's case, had been forgotten after the investigation went cold. But there it was, sparkling on the wrist of a billionaire who claimed she'd never set foot in Austin before today. Zara's mind reeled, trying to process the impossibility of what she was seeing. How could her father's watch, his murder evidence, be adorning the wrist of one of America's most powerful women? The police had told her it was gone forever, probably sold to a pawn shop or melted down for the gold. She'd grieved for that watch almost as much as she'd grieved for her father, knowing that the last physical connection to 4 generations of Mitchell men had been lost to street criminals who couldn't have understood its significance. But here it was. The coffee pot slipped from Zara's nerveless fingers and shattered against the linoleum floor, sending brown liquid splashing across Vivian's $1,000 shoes and designer stockings. "I'm so sorry." Zara dropped to her knees, scrambling to collect the ceramic pieces with shaking hands. Blood welled up where a sharp edge bit into her palm, mixing with the spilled coffee and dark rivulets that looked disturbingly like the crime scene photos she'd never been allowed to see. Her world had narrowed to that watch, to the impossible sight of her father's most precious possession adorning the wrist of a stranger. How is this possible? "Are you all right, dear?" Vivian's voice held a note of concern, but when Zara looked up, she saw something else in those ice-blue eyes. Something that looked almost like recognition, fear, guilt. No, that was impossible. Vivian Sterling was a billionaire hotel magnate from New York. She had no connection to a small-time mechanic from Austin's East Side. But the watch said otherwise. Zara stood slowly, ignoring the blood dripping from her cut palm onto the broken ceramic. She met Vivian's gaze directly, her voice steady despite the earthquake happening in her chest. "That watch," she said quietly, her words cutting through the diner's sudden silence like a blade. "My father died with that same watch in his hands." The effect was immediate and electric. Every conversation in the diner stopped mid-sentence. Even Marco had ceased his eggs flipping to watch the drama unfold. The construction workers at table 6 paused mid-conversation, coffee cups halfway to their lips. Mrs. Chun leaned forward in her booth, sensing blood in the water with the instinct of someone who'd lived through 8 decades of human drama. Officer Patterson's hand moved instinctively toward his service weapon, though he didn't seem to know why. For just a moment, maybe 2 heartbeats. Vivian Sterling's perfect mask slipped. Fear flickered across her features like lightning behind storm clouds. Her hand moved protectively to cover the watch face, and her breathing quickened almost imperceptibly. The phone in her other hand trembled slightly, and for the first time since she'd entered the diner, she looked fragile. Human. She knows something. She knows exactly what I'm talking about. Then she laughed. It was a perfect sound, cultured and dismissive, designed to make Zara feel small and foolish. The kind of laugh that billionaires had perfected for dealing with inconvenient truths and uncomfortable questions. "Oh, darling, you must be mistaken. This watch has been in my family for decades. It's a one-of-a-kind piece from Switzerland, custom made by Rolex specifically for my grandfather in 1997, with my father's name engraved on it." Zara's voice rose, carrying across the suddenly silent diner like a battle cry. "Louise Mitchell, 1998. Want me to tell you what's inscribed on the back too? To the best father a daughter could ask for. Love always, Zara." The color drained from Vivian's face so quickly that her foundation looked like a mask painted on pale marble. She stood abruptly, her phone clattering to the table with enough force to crack the screen protector. "I don't know what kind of scam you're trying to pull," Vivian said, but her voice had lost its authority. The words came out slightly breathless, as if someone had punched her in the stomach. "But I won't be subjected to accusations from..." "From what?" Zara stepped closer, fury burning through her shock, like gasoline on a fire. 2 years of suppressed rage and grief came pouring out in a torrent of words. "From the daughter of the man you had killed? From someone who knows exactly how you got that watch." The words hung in the air like a curse. Vivian's eyes widened, and for a terrifying moment, Zara saw something raw and desperate flash across her features. Guilt? Fear? Or something darker? Something that spoke of sleepless nights and decisions that couldn't be undone? "She knows. Oh God, she knows exactly what happened to my father." The diner had gone so quiet that the buzz of the fluorescent lights sounded like a swarm of insects. Officer Patterson had his hand on his radio now, though he seemed uncertain whether he was dealing with a disturbed waitress or something more serious. The construction workers were filming with their phones, probably already uploading to TikTok with captions about crazy breakfast drama. But Vivian Sterling wasn't looking at any of them. Her ice-blue eyes were locked on Zara's face with an intensity that felt almost physical. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried clearly through the silent diner. "You have quite an imagination," she said softly, reaching into her coat and pulling out a crisp $100 bill. She placed it on the table next to her untouched coffee with deliberate precision. "For the cleanup. And perhaps therapy." She turned to leave, her heels clicking against the broken ceramic like gunshots. But as she reached the door, She paused and looked back at Zara with those ice-cold eyes. The expression on her face was unreadable, but there was something in it that made Zara's skin crawl. Not quite a threat, but not reassurance either. Some truths are too dangerous to uncover. Miss Mitchell, Vivian said quietly. I suggest you remember that. She knew Zara's name. She knew her father's name. She knew things she shouldn't know. Things that no random billionaire should know about a dead mechanic from Austin's East Side. The bell chimed as the door swung shut behind her, leaving Zara standing in a pool of coffee and broken dreams, blood dripping from her palm onto the floor where a billionaire had just threatened her life. The diner erupted in whispered conversations, but Zara heard none of it. Her mind was racing, connecting dots that formed a picture too terrifying to believe. The mysterious lawsuit her father had mentioned in his last phone call, the one he'd been too scared to discuss over the phone. The way he'd seemed paranoid in the weeks before his death, always looking over his shoulder, jumping at unexpected sounds. The fact that his random robbery had occurred just 3 blocks from the construction site, where Sterling Hotels was building their newest luxury development. What if it hadn't been random at all? Marco appeared at her side with a dustpan and a wet towel, his weathered face creased with concern. He'd worked the grill at Harper's for 20 years, serving eggs and hash browns to 3 generations of East Side families. He'd seen heartbreak and drama and poverty in all its forms, but the look in his eyes suggested that this was something new. Mija, you okay? He asked gently. You look like you've seen a ghost. Zara stared at the door, where Vivian Sterling had disappeared, her father's watch disappearing with her into the Austin morning. The $100 bill lay on the table like evidence of a crime. Too much money for spilled coffee, too much money for anything that happened in a place like Harper's Diner. Guilt money. Payment for silence. Maybe I have, she whispered. But as she knelt to clean up the broken pieces of ceramic, cutting her hands further on the sharp edges, one thought burned through her mind with crystalline clarity. That watch was just the beginning. Because if Vivian Sterling had Louise Mitchell's watch, if she knew Zara's name without introduction, if she was issuing threats disguised as advice, then everything the police had told her about her father's death was a lie. And that meant the most powerful woman in America had just made the mistake of underestimating a grieving daughter with nothing left to lose. What would you do if you discovered your parents' killer was sitting right in front of you? And why do you think Vivian is really in Austin? Comment below where you're watching from. And let me know, is Zara in danger, or is there more to this story than meets the eye? Because what you're about to discover will change everything you think you know about justice, revenge, and the price of truth. Sometimes the truth doesn't set you free. It locks you in a cage you never knew existed. And sometimes the people we trust most are the ones with the most to hide. The rest of Zara's shift passed in a haze of mechanical movements and racing thoughts. Pour coffee. Take orders. Deliver plates. Smile at customers who had no idea their waitress had just accused a billionaire of murder in front of half the neighborhood. By the time she flipped the sign to closed at 2 p.m., her hands had stopped shaking, but her mind was still reeling. The $100 bill sat in her apron pocket like a lead weight, Vivian Sterling's final insult burning against her hip with every step. Some truths are too dangerous to uncover, Miss Mitchell. The words echoed in her head as she climbed the narrow staircase to her apartment above the diner. Dangerous for whom? For Zara, who was already living paycheck to paycheck with nothing to lose. Or dangerous for a billionaire whose empire might crumble if the wrong secrets came to light. The apartment was a studio barely large enough for a twin bed, a kitchenette, and a bathroom with pipes that groaned like dying animals. But it was hers, paid for with tips and the modest salary Rosie managed to scrape together each month. After her father's death, she'd sold the family house to pay off his debts and moved into this shoebox because it was all she could afford. Independence had come at a steep price, but it was better than charity from relatives who whispered about poor Zara behind her back, while secretly relieved they didn't have to take her in. She dropped onto the sagging mattress and pulled out her phone, fingers hovering over Detective Martinez's contact information. Roberto Martinez had been the lead investigator on her father's case, a kind man with sad eyes who delivered the news of her father's death with genuine compassion. He'd promised to keep her updated on the investigation, but the updates had grown sparse and eventually stopped altogether. What would she tell him? That a billionaire was wearing her dead father's watch? That she'd accused Vivian Sterling of murder in front of a diner full of witnesses? He'd think she was having a breakdown. Hell, maybe she was. Instead, she opened her laptop, an ancient Dell that took 3 minutes to boot up, and started researching. If Vivian Sterling really was connected to her father's death, there had to be evidence somewhere. Paper trails, business connections, something that would prove she wasn't losing her mind. But the internet painted Vivian as exactly what she appeared to be, a self-made billionaire with a spotless reputation. Born in Ohio to middle-class parents, she'd worked her way through college, started with a single bed and breakfast, and built an empire through shrewd business decisions and an eye for luxury markets. Her hotels were featured in travel magazines, her business acumen praised in Forbes, her philanthropic efforts lauded by charity organizations. There was no mention of Austin, no connection to construction or development on the East Side, no reason for her to be anywhere near Louis Mitchell or his daughter. So why had she been at Harper's Diner? And how the hell did she have his watch? Zara was still staring at the screen when she heard footsteps on the stairs outside her door. Heavy, deliberate steps that paused on the landing. She held her breath, listening to the silence that followed. Probably just Mrs. Rodriguez from the apartment next door, coming home from her cleaning job. But Mrs. Rodriguez wore soft-soled shoes that barely made a sound, and these had been hard-soled dress shoes, like the ones Vivian Sterling had been wearing. The footsteps retreated, and Zara heard the distant sound of a car door slamming. She crept to the window and peered through the blinds, catching a glimpse of a black sedan pulling away from the curb. The windows were tinted too dark to see inside, but something about the car's sleek lines screamed expensive. Paranoia. That's all this is. Grief and shock making you see connections that don't exist. But her hands were shaking again as she double-checked the locks on her door. She was heating up leftover ramen for dinner when she heard the soft thud against her door. Not a knock, something lighter, like paper sliding across wood. Zara froze, chopsticks halfway to her mouth. She waited a full minute before creeping to the door and peering through the peephole. The hallway was empty, but there was definitely something white on the floor just outside her apartment. She cracked the door open and found a manila envelope with her name written across the front in elegant script. No return address, no postmark. Hand-delivered. By someone wearing hard-soled shoes. Back inside with the door triple-locked behind her, Zara stared at the envelope like it might explode. Part of her wanted to throw it away unopened, to pretend this morning had never happened, that she'd imagined the whole thing. But grief and curiosity were stronger than fear. Inside was a single photograph, black and white, slightly faded with age. It showed two people standing in front of what looked like a construction site, hard hats in their hands, broad smiles on their faces. The man was younger, but unmistakably her father. Louis Mitchell with 30 fewer pounds and 20 fewer gray hairs, wearing a suit she'd never seen him own. The woman beside him was equally unmistakable, despite being 20 years younger and dressed in business casual instead of designer couture. Vivian Sterling. They stood close together, comfortable in each other's space, like old friends or business partners. Behind them, a partially constructed building rose against a cloudy sky, its steel frame reaching toward heaven like a skeleton of dreams. Zara flipped the photograph over with trembling fingers and found a date written in faded ink. Austin, May 15th, 2003. 2003. She'd been 6 years old, playing with dolls while her father posed for photographs with a woman who would become one of the most powerful people in America. Her father had known Vivian Sterling. Not just known her, been close enough to pose for photographs, to stand beside her at what looked like a groundbreaking ceremony or construction milestone. And he'd never mentioned it, not once in the 17 years between that photograph and his death. Why? The question consumed her as she paced the tiny apartment, wearing a path in the already threadbare carpet. Her father had been a mechanic, a simple man who worked with his hands and came home covered in grease and motor oil. When had he ever moved in circles wealthy enough to include future billionaires? And why had Vivian Sterling delivered this photograph to her door? Because that's what had happened, wasn't it? The mysterious envelope, the expensive car pulling away from the curb. Vivian had come back. But why? To prove they'd known each other? To threaten her with evidence of some connection Zara was supposed to understand? She studied the photograph under her desk lamp, searching for clues in the background details. The construction site looked familiar, but she couldn't place it. The building's steel frame was too generic to identify, and the surrounding landscape offered no distinctive landmarks. But 2003. What had been happening in Austin in 2003? She pulled up local news archives on her ancient laptop, searching for construction projects and business developments from 20 years ago. The internet connection was painfully slow, each page taking forever to load, but eventually she found what she was looking for. May 2003 had been a busy month for Austin development. The tech boom was just beginning to transform the city, bringing an influx of young professionals who needed places to live and work. Dozens of construction projects had been underway, from office buildings downtown to residential developments on the outskirts. But one project stood out from the rest, the Sterling Grande, a luxury hotel complex that had broken ground in East Austin in early 2003. It was Vivian Sterling's first major project outside of the coasts, her entry into the Texas market that would eventually make her a household name. The construction site in the photograph could easily be the Sterling Grande. But what was her father doing there? Why was he dressed like a businessman instead of a mechanic? And why was he standing beside Vivian Sterling like they were partners instead of strangers? Zara's phone buzzed with a text from her brother Carlos, a senior at UT studying engineering on a scholarship that stretched their finances to the breaking point. Hey sis, can you cover my textbook costs this semester? I know money's tight, but I'm desperate. We'll pay you back after graduation, promise. The message was a painful reminder of why she was working double shifts at a diner instead of pursuing her own dreams. Carlos was the smart one, the one who would escape their father's fate and make something of himself. She was just the girl who served coffee and cleaned up other people's messes. But maybe not anymore. She texted back, of course. How much do you need? His response came immediately, for $100. You're the best big sister ever. For $100. 2 weeks of tips if she was lucky, a month if business was slow. Money she didn't have for textbooks she'd never need because she'd never go back to school. But as she stared at the photograph of her father and Vivian Sterling, a new possibility began to form in her mind. A dangerous, desperate possibility that made her pulse quicken with something that felt almost like hope. What if her father hadn't just been a mechanic? What if there was more to his story than she'd ever known? The Sterling Grande had been a massive success, launching Vivian's national expansion and making her millions in the process. If Luis Mitchell had been involved in that project, if he'd been a partner or investor or something more than just a construction worker, then maybe there was money somewhere. Money that should have gone to his family after his death. Money that might be enough to change everything. She grabbed her jacket and headed for the door, the photograph clutched in her trembling hand. The Austin Public Library stayed open until 9 p.m., and their computers were faster than her ancient laptop. She needed to research everything she could find about the Sterling Grande project, about construction records and business filings, and anything else that might explain her father's connection to a billionaire. But as she reached for the doorknob, her phone rang. The number was blocked, but she answered anyway, hoping it might be Carlos calling back with more details about his textbook situation. Hello, Miss Mitchell. The voice was cultured, familiar, ice cold. I trust you received my package. Zara's blood turned to Arctic water in her veins. Vivian Sterling. Indeed. I think it's time we had a proper conversation, don't you? About what? About how you murdered my father and stole his watch. A soft chuckle came through the phone, devoid of warmth or humor. Oh, my dear girl. You understand so little about what really happened. Your father and I. We had a complicated relationship. Complicated enough for you to kill him. Complicated enough that his death was a tragedy for both of us. Vivian's voice carried a note of something that might have been genuine sadness. Meet me tomorrow at noon. The construction site where that photograph was taken. Come alone, and perhaps you'll learn the truth about Luis Mitchell. Why should I trust you? Because, Miss Mitchell, I'm the only person left alive who can tell you who your father really was. And because, her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Because there are people far more dangerous than me who would prefer that story never came to light. The line went dead. Zara stood in her doorway, phone trembling in her hand, staring at the photograph of her father and the woman who might have killed him. Outside, Austin hummed with its usual nighttime energy, traffic and music and the distant sound of construction as the city continued its endless growth. But inside her tiny apartment, the silence was deafening. What if her father hadn't been the man she thought he was? What if his death hadn't been random? What if the truth was so much worse than a simple robbery gone wrong? And what if Vivian Sterling was right about there being people more dangerous than her? Zara looked at the photograph one more time, studying her father's smile and the way he stood beside the woman who would become a billionaire. He looked happy, confident, like a man with a future full of possibilities. Nothing like the paranoid, frightened man he'd become in the weeks before his death. Whatever had happened between May 2003 and October 2021, it had transformed Louise Mitchell from a partner in a luxury hotel project to a dead mechanic in an alley. And tomorrow at noon, Zara was going to find out why, even if it killed her, because some truths were worth dying for, and she'd lived with lies long enough. But first, she needed to make sure Carlos got his textbook money, just in case tomorrow didn't go according to plan. What do you think happened between Louise and Vivian in those 18 years? And would you meet a suspected killer alone for answers? Comment below, because this photograph is just the first piece of a puzzle that goes deeper than anyone imagined. And trust me, what Vivian reveals tomorrow will change everything you think you know about loyalty, betrayal, and the price of keeping secrets. What if everything you knew about your father was a carefully constructed lie? And what if the person who destroyed him was also the person trying to save you? Zara spent the night researching instead of sleeping, her ancient laptop glowing in the darkness as she dove deeper into the Sterling Grande project. By dawn, her eyes were burning and her coffee mug had been refilled 6 times, but she'd uncovered enough information to make her stomach churn with a mixture of excitement and dread. The Sterling Grande hadn't just been Vivian's first Texas project, it had been her first major success anywhere. The luxury hotel had opened in late 2003 to rave reviews and immediate profitability, launching Vivian Sterling from a small-time operator with 3 boutiques into a national hospitality mogul within 5 years. But the project's financing told a different story than the glowing business journal suggested. Buried in the Austin Business Record archives, Zara found a brief mention of the hotel's initial investors, Sterling Grande Development LLC, a partnership between Vivian Sterling of Sterling Hospitality and Louise Mitchell of Mitchell Construction Consulting. Mitchell Construction Consulting. Her father had never worked in construction consulting. He'd been a mechanic at Rodriguez Auto Shop for 15 years, coming home every night with grease under his fingernails and motor oil stains on his work shirts. She had childhood memories of him in coveralls, not business suits. Of him fixing carburetors, not consulting on hotel developments. So where had Mitchell Construction Consulting come from? More digging revealed business registration records from 2002. Louise Mitchell had incorporated Mitchell Construction Consulting in January of that year, listing himself as president and sole employee. The business address was a P.O. box, and the company description was vague. Construction project management and consulting services for commercial developments. For a mechanic with a high school education, it was an unlikely career change. Unless it wasn't a career change at all. Unless it was something else entirely. The pieces were starting to form a picture, but it was a picture that made no sense with the father she'd known. Louise Mitchell, construction consultant and hotel investor, partnered with a woman who would become a billionaire. Louise Mitchell, the man who'd lived in a modest house and driven a 15-year-old pickup truck until the day he died. If he'd been Vivian's partner in a multi-million-dollar project, where was the money? By 11 a.m., Zara was standing in the parking lot of what had once been the Sterling Grande construction site, now a thriving luxury hotel complex in the heart of Austin's revitalized East Side. The building rose 12 stories into the Texas sky, all glass and steel and architectural ambition, surrounded by manicured gardens and a valet stand where BMWs and Mercedes waited like expensive pets. The contrast with Harper's Diner, just 6 blocks away, was stark enough to give her emotional whiplash. She'd called in sick to work, the first time in 2 years, and spent her last $40 on a rideshare to get here. The photograph was folded in her jacket pocket, and Detective Martinez's phone number was programmed into her speed dial, just in case this meeting went sideways. Which it probably would. A Blacktown car pulled into the lot at exactly noon, and Vivian Sterling emerged from the back seat, like she was stepping onto a red carpet. Today she wore a navy business suit that probably cost more than Zara made in 6 months, her silver hair perfect despite the October wind, her ice blue eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses. She walked directly to where Zara waited, her heels clicking against the asphalt with metronomic precision. "Miss Mitchell, thank you for coming. I want answers." Zara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Starting with why you have my father's watch." Vivian removed her sunglasses, and for the first time since yesterday's encounter, her expression wasn't carefully controlled. She looked tired, older than her 62 years, with lines around her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and difficult decisions. "Your father was my partner," she said simply, "in this project and several others. The watch, he left it to me in his will." "That's impossible. My father was a mechanic. He worked at Rodriguez Auto Shop for 15 years, yes." Excellent cover story. Vivian's mouth curved in what might have been a smile if it had contained any warmth. Luis was always good with his hands, whether it was engines or construction equipment. But his real talent was for numbers. Financial projections, cost analyses, risk assessment. He had an instinct for profitable ventures that most MBAs would kill for. Zara felt like the ground was shifting beneath her feet. "You're saying my father was what? Some kind of secret businessman?" "I'm saying your father was the smartest man I ever knew. And the most ethical, which is what got him killed." The words hit like a physical blow. "So you admit it. You had him murdered." "I admit that I failed to protect him when he needed it most." Vivian's voice carried genuine pain, the first real emotion Zara had seen from her. "Come, let me show you something." She led Zara through the hotel's gleaming lobby, past marble floors and crystal chandeliers that screamed luxury to anyone with eyes. The staff recognized Vivian immediately, bowing and scraping with the practiced deference reserved for very important people. She acknowledged them with small nods, her attention focused entirely on Zara. They took the elevator to the top floor, emerging into what was clearly the executive level. Vivian's keycard opened a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of Austin's skyline. "This was supposed to be Luis's office," Vivian said, gesturing toward the empty space. "He designed the layout himself. Said he wanted to be able to see the whole city, to remember where he came from while he planned where he was going." The office was beautifully appointed but sterile, like a museum display of corporate success. But on the desk sat a single framed photograph. Luis Mitchell and Vivian Sterling at the construction site, the same image that had been delivered to Zara's door. "He was going to move up here after the hotel opened," Vivian continued. "Leave the auto shop, start living the life he'd earned. But first, he wanted to tell you the truth about what he'd been doing, about the money he'd made, the future he'd secured for you and Carlos." "Then why didn't he?" The question came out as barely a whisper. "Because he discovered something he wasn't supposed to know. About our investors, about where some of the money for this project came from." Vivian moved to the windows, staring out at the city below. "Luis had a conscience, Miss Mitchell. It was his greatest strength and his fatal weakness." "What did he find out?" "That not all of our funding came from legitimate sources. That some of our silent partners had questionable business practices. That the Sterling Grande was being used to launder money for people who don't appreciate whistleblowers." The words sent ice through Zara's veins. "Money laundering. You're saying my father was involved in money laundering." "I'm saying your father discovered it and threatened to expose it. Which is why those silent partners decided he was a liability." Vivian turned back to face her, and the pain in her eyes was unmistakable. "I tried to talk him out of it. Tried to convince him to take his share of the profits and walk away quietly. But Luis, he couldn't live with himself knowing that dirty money was funding schools and hospitals and community centers. He said some things were more important than money. So they killed him. They made it look like a robbery. Professional work, the kind of professionals our silent partners keep on retainer for situations like this." Vivian's voice was barely above a whisper. "I've been trying to find evidence ever since, something that would let me expose them without destroying everything Luis helped build." Zara sank into a chair, her mind reeling. Her father, the simple mechanic who'd raised her to believe in right and wrong, had been a millionaire businessman who died for his principles. It was simultaneously everything she'd ever believed about him and nothing she'd ever known to be true. "The watch," she said finally. "Why do you have his watch?" "He gave it to me the night before he died." Said he had a feeling something was going to happen, and he wanted to make sure it went to someone who would remember what he stood for. Vivian pulled the Rolex from her wrist and placed it on the desk between them. He asked me to give it to you when you were old enough to understand what he'd sacrificed. And when would that have been? When you turned 25. In 2 years. Vivian's smile was sad. He had it all planned out. How he'd tell you the truth, how he'd transfer the business to you, how you'd never have to worry about money again. He wanted you to go to college, to become the journalist you dreamed of being. He had a trust fund set up for Carlos too, enough to pay for medical school if that's what he wanted. A trust fund. The words felt foreign in Zara's mouth. How much money are we talking about? Your father's share of the Sterling Grande profits was $12 million, plus his stake in 3 other projects we developed together. Vivian paused, letting the numbers sink in. Combined with compound interest over the past 2 years, the trust is currently worth approximately $18 million. $18 million. Zara stared at the watch on the desk, her father's name engraved in tiny letters that had started this entire nightmare. $18 million that should have been hers and Carlos's, if her father had lived long enough to claim it. Where is it? This trust fund. Frozen. The lawyers won't release it without proof of Luis's identity and official death certificates, which have been mysteriously difficult to obtain. Our silent partners have been very thorough in erasing the paper trail. But you're Vivian Sterling. You're worth billions. Can't I just what? Accuse powerful criminal organizations of murder and money laundering without evidence? Do you know what would happen to me? To you? To everyone Luis cared about? Vivian's voice hardened. These people don't send polite legal notices, Miss Mitchell. They send the same professionals who killed your father. The office fell silent except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of traffic far below. Zara picked up her father's watch, feeling the weight of it in her hands. Not just the physical weight of gold and steel, but the emotional weight of dreams and sacrifices and a love she'd never fully understood. If what you're saying is true, she said slowly, then why are you helping me? Why risk exposing yourself? Because I owed Luis everything, and I failed him when it mattered most. Vivian's composure cracked for just a moment, revealing the grief underneath. Because every day I wear his watch and remember that a good man died because I wasn't brave enough to walk away from dirty money when I had the chance. And because, she added, her voice dropping to barely a whisper, because those same people who killed your father are now coming after me. And after you. The words hit Zara like a bucket of ice water. What do you mean, coming after me? You think yesterday's confrontation at the diner went unnoticed? You think accusing me of murder in front of half the neighborhood was something they'd ignore? Vivian moved to her desk and pulled out a thick manila folder. They've been watching you for months, Miss Mitchell. Ever since you started working at Harper's Diner. Ever since you moved to an apartment 6 blocks from the Sterling Grande. She spread photographs across the desk, surveillance photos of Zara walking to work, serving customers, climbing the stairs to her apartment. Pictures taken with telephoto lenses from cars parked across the street. Professional work by people who knew how to stay invisible. They were waiting, Vivian continued. Waiting to see if you'd inherited your father's curiosity along with his sense of justice. Waiting to see if you'd start asking questions about his death. And now they know you have. Which means you're no longer under surveillance, Miss Mitchell. You're under threat assessment. The room spun around Zara as the full implications hit her. Not only had her father been murdered for trying to expose criminal activity, but now she was in the same crosshairs simply for being his daughter. What do they want from me? They want to know what you know. What Luis might have told you before he died. What evidence he might have hidden. Vivian's ice blue eyes met hers directly. And when they're satisfied that you don't know anything useful, they'll eliminate the liability. Just like they did to him. Just like they did to him. Zara stood up abruptly, pacing to the windows and staring down at the city where she'd grown up, the city that had suddenly become a hunting ground with her as the prey. So what do you suggest I do? Run? Hide? Spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder? I suggest we find the evidence Luis died trying to expose, Vivian said quietly. I suggest we finish what he started. And if we can't, then we make sure Carlos gets that textbook money you promised him. Because $18 million doesn't do anyone any good if there's no one left alive to inherit it. The threat was clear, but so was the challenge. Her father had died for his principles, Murdered because he'd chosen justice over money, truth over safety. Now she had the same choice to make. Run and spend her life in fear, or fight and risk ending up like Luis. But as she looked at the surveillance photographs spread across the desk, at the evidence of months of watching and waiting and planning, Zara realized she'd already made her choice the moment she'd confronted Vivian Sterling at Harper's Diner. There was no running from people like this. There was only fighting back or dying. And Louise Mitchell hadn't raised a daughter who ran from fights. "Tell me what you need me to do," she said. Vivian's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "I need you to help me steal $18 million from the people who killed your father. Would you risk everything for justice, or take the money and run? And do you think Vivian is telling the truth about trying to protect Zara? Drop a comment with your thoughts, because what happens next will test every limit of loyalty, courage, and survival. And trust me, the real enemies haven't even shown themselves yet. What if the evidence you need to survive is hidden in the one place your enemies would never think to look? And what if your father's final act of love was also his death sentence?" "Before we go any further," Vivian said, sliding a thick legal document across the desk, "you need to understand exactly what we're up against." The document was a lawsuit filing, dated 6 months before Louise Mitchell's death. The plaintiff was listed as Mitchell Construction Consulting LLC, and the defendants included Sterling Grande Development Partners, along with 3 companies Zara had never heard of: Meridian Capital Holdings, Phoenix Investment Group, and Blackwater Financial Services. The claim was staggering. Louise was suing for breach of contract, fraudulent misrepresentation, and conspiracy to commit money laundering, seeking damages of $57 million plus punitive awards. "He tried to do it legally first," Zara whispered, scanning the dense legal language. "He tried to expose them through the courts. Your father believed in the system. He thought justice could be bought with lawsuits and depositions." Vivian's voice carried bitter experience. "He didn't understand that when you're fighting people who own judges and prosecutors, the courtroom becomes just another crime scene." "What happened to the case?" "Dismissed without prejudice 3 weeks after filing. The judge cited insufficient evidence and frivolous claims against legitimate business enterprises." Vivian retrieved another folder from her desk drawer. Judge Harrison Caldwell, who coincidentally purchased a vacation home in Costa Rica shortly after his ruling. Cash transaction, $3 million. The implications hit Zara like a freight train. They bought the judge. They bought everyone who mattered. The judge, the court clerk who accidentally misfiled crucial evidence, the private investigator Louise hired who suddenly developed amnesia about what he'd discovered. Vivian's fingers drummed against the desk in a rhythm that sounded like gunfire. By the time Louise realized how deep the corruption went, he was already a marked man. Zara studied the lawsuit more carefully, her journalism training finally kicking in despite the emotional chaos. The language was precise, methodical, building a case like an architect designing a skyscraper. Her father might have been a mechanic by trade, but he'd constructed this legal attack with the thoroughness of someone who understood that details could mean the difference between justice and death. "These other companies," she said, pointing to the defendants' list. "Meridian, Phoenix, Blackwater, what are they really? Front organizations. Shell companies designed to hide the real money behind our projects." Vivian moved to a wall-mounted monitor and pulled up what looked like a complex organizational chart. Meridian Capital is owned by Phoenix Investment Group, which is a subsidiary of Blackwater Financial, which is controlled by a holding company in the Cayman Islands that doesn't officially exist. And behind all that, the Kozlov organization. Russian money, initially, but they've diversified into Mexican cartels, Chinese triads, and good old-fashioned American organized crime. They specialize in making dirty money look clean through real estate development. The name sent ice through Zara's veins. She might work in a diner, but she wasn't naive about the world. The Kozlov organization was mentioned in news stories about international crime syndicates, about money laundering operations that spanned continents, about people who disappeared without trace when they became inconvenient. "You're saying my father tried to sue the Russian mob." "I'm saying your father tried to sue everyone. He didn't care how powerful they were or how dangerous they could be. He found evidence of money laundering, conspiracy, tax evasion, and probably a dozen other federal crimes. Vivian's expression was equal parts admiration and frustration. He was going to bring down an entire network of criminal enterprises with a lawsuit filed from a law office in downtown Austin. And you tried to stop him. I begged him to stop. Offered him $20 million to walk away quietly, to take you and Carlos somewhere safe and start over. Vivian's composure cracked slightly, revealing the grief underneath. He said some fights were worth having, even if you couldn't win them. Said he'd rather die standing up than live on his knees. Zara traced her finger across her father's signature on the lawsuit, the familiar loops and angles she'd seen on birthday cards and permission slips throughout her childhood. Luis Mitchell, construction consultant and secret millionaire, taking on organized crime with nothing but legal documents and moral courage. He sounds like the man I knew, she said softly. Stubborn as hell and too principled for his own good. He was the best man I ever knew, and the most dangerous to people like Kozlov. So they killed him. They made him disappear, staged a robbery, eliminated the witness, corrupted the investigation. Clean, professional, untraceable. Vivian returned to her desk and pulled out another folder. But they made one mistake. What? They assumed Luis was working alone. The folder contained copies of documents Zara had never seen before, bank statements, wire transfer records, correspondence between law firms, financial projections that went back years. Her father's handwriting was on many of them, but there were other signatures too, other names she didn't recognize. Luis had partners in the lawsuit, Vivian explained. Other investors who'd discovered the money laundering, other business owners who'd been pressured into participating. 7 people total, all willing to testify against Kozlov's operation. What happened to them? 3 died in accidents within 6 months of Luis. Car crashes, heart attacks, a gas leak explosion. Very convenient for people who prefer their witnesses silent. Vivian's voice hardened. But 3 others went into hiding. Changed their names, moved across the country, started new lives where Kozlov couldn't find them. And the 7th? The 7th was me. The admission hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Zara stared at Vivian Sterling, billionaire hotel magnate and secret whistleblower, trying to reconcile the woman who'd built an empire with the woman who'd risked everything to expose corruption. You were part of the lawsuit. You were going to testify against your own investors. I was going to testify against the people who'd turned my dream into a nightmare. The Sterling Grande was supposed to be clean money, legitimate investment, the foundation of something beautiful. Vivian's ice-blue eyes blazed with barely controlled fury. Instead, it became a washing machine for blood money from drug dealers and human traffickers. So why didn't you? Why didn't you testify? Because Luis died first. Because the other witnesses started disappearing. Because I realized that testimony without evidence was just suicide with extra steps. Vivian opened her laptop and began typing rapidly. So I did what Luis couldn't do. I survived, and spent the last 2 years building evidence. I spent the last 2 years learning how to be as ruthless as the people who killed your father. How to hide money in offshore accounts. How to create false identities. How to make digital evidence disappear from government databases. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. How to beat criminals at their own game. On the monitor, financial documents began appearing, bank records, wire transfers, email communications that made Zara's head spin with their complexity. But even with her limited understanding of high finance, she could see the pattern. Money flowing from obviously criminal sources into legitimate businesses, then back out again as clean investment capital. This is it, she breathed. This is the evidence Luis died trying to expose. Some of it. The financial trail is clear enough to satisfy any honest prosecutor, assuming we could find one who hadn't been bought. Vivian pulled up another screen showing what looked like a communication log. But the real smoking gun is this. The screen showed a series of encrypted messages, decoded into plain text that read like a hit order. Instructions for eliminating the mechanic problem in Austin, details about staging the robbery, confirmation of payment for professional services rendered. The final message was timestamped 3 hours after Luis Mitchell's body was found. They were careless, Vivian said. Arrogant enough to think their encryption was unbreakable, stupid enough to keep digital records of murder for hire. But I've had 2 years to crack their systems, 2 years to gather evidence while pretending to be a grieving business partner. You've been planning this the whole time. I've been planning justice the whole time. For Luis, for the other witnesses, for everyone who suffered because criminals were allowed to hide behind legitimate businesses. Vivian closed the laptop with decisive finality. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed someone with a personal stake in seeing Kozlov destroyed, someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Someone like Louise Mitchell's daughter. Someone exactly like Louise Mitchell's daughter. Zara stood up and walked to the windows, looking down at the city where her father had lived and died, where she'd grown up thinking she understood the world and her place in it. Everything had changed in the space of 48 hours. Her father wasn't just a mechanic. He was a businessman and a whistleblower. Her family wasn't poor. They were secretly wealthy. And she wasn't just a waitress trying to survive. She was the key to exposing an international criminal conspiracy. "What's the plan?" she asked without turning around. "We use the evidence to force the release of Luis's trust fund. $18 million buys a lot of legal representation, a lot of protection, and a lot of pressure on the right government officials." Vivian joined her at the windows, both women staring down at the streets where normal people lived normal lives without Russian mob contracts on their heads. "More importantly, we use it to disappear before Kozlov realizes what we've done." Disappear where? Somewhere safe. Somewhere we can live off $18 million while federal prosecutors build cases against everyone involved in Luis's murder. And you think they'll actually prosecute this time? I think when faced with evidence of international money laundering, judicial corruption, and multiple homicides, even bought prosecutors have to do their jobs. Vivian's smile was sharp as broken glass. "And I think some crimes are too big to cover up, even for people like Kozlov." Zara turned to face her, studying the woman who'd been her father's partner, his potential killer, and now his daughter's only ally in a fight against organized crime. "There's something you're not telling me," she said. "Something about why this matters so much to you personally." Vivian was quiet for a long moment, her expression unreadable. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Luis wasn't just my business partner, Zara. He was..." She paused, struggling with words. "We were going to be married." The revelation hit, like a physical blow. "Married?" He proposed 3 days before he filed the lawsuit. Said he wanted to make sure you and Carlos would be taken care of if anything happened to him. But he also wanted to build a life together. Vivian's composure finally cracked completely, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I said yes. We were going to tell you after the legal case was resolved, after we'd cleaned up the mess with Kozlov. He never mentioned. He never mentioned me because he was protecting you. The same way I've been protecting you by staying away, by pretending not to care, by letting you think I was just another cold billionaire who'd forgotten where she came from." Vivian wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "But I've loved you like a daughter for 2 years, Zara. And I've missed him every single day since they took him away from us." The words transformed everything yet again. Vivian Sterling wasn't just her father's business partner or potential killer. She was the stepmother Zara never knew she'd had. The woman who would have been family if circumstances had been different. "So this isn't about money," Zara said slowly. "This is about revenge. This is about justice. For Luis, for us, for everyone who's been hurt by people like Kozlov." Vivian's ice blue eyes hardened into diamonds. "But if you want to call it revenge, I won't argue with you. And if we fail, then we die together, the way Luis would have wanted us to live." Zara looked at the lawsuit one more time, at her father's signature authorizing a fight he couldn't win alone. But he hadn't been alone, had he? He'd had Vivian, and he'd been building a family that included both his daughters. The biological one, and the chosen one who'd loved him enough to risk everything for justice. Some fights were worth having, even if you couldn't win them. But maybe, with the right evidence and the right allies, this was a fight they could win. "Tell me what you need me to do," she said. Vivian's smile was radiant with grief and determination. "I need you to help me finish what your father started. I need you to help me destroy the Kozlov organization, and get our money back, and get our family back. All of it. The money, the justice, the life Luis wanted us to have together." Outside the windows, Austin hummed with its usual energy, unaware that 2 women were planning to take on international organized crime from the top floor of a luxury hotel. But inside that office, surrounded by evidence and memories and the ghost of a man who died for his principles, Zara Mitchell finally understood what she was fighting for. Not just money, not just revenge, but the chance to become the person her father had raised her to be. And that was worth any risk, any danger, any consequence that might follow. Do you think Vivian is telling the truth about being engaged to Luis? And would you trust someone who kept that big a secret for 2 years? Comment below, because the next chapter reveals the shocking truth about who's been funding Carlos's education, and it changes everything about this family story. Trust me, what you're about to discover will make you question everything you thought you knew about loyalty, love, and the price of keeping promises to the dead. What if the person you're planning to destroy is the same person who's been saving your family? And what if every choice you make next determines whether your brother lives or dies? The revelation about Luis and Vivian's engagement was still echoing in Zara's mind when her phone buzzed with another text from Carlos. Sis, got some weird news. The financial aid office says my tuition for next semester is already paid. Anonymous donor through some scholarship foundation. Did you do something? Zara's blood turned cold as she read the message. She looked up at Vivian, who was pretending to study the legal documents on her desk, but couldn't hide the guilty expression that had crept across her face. How long? Zara's voice was deadly quiet. How long what? How long have you been paying for Carlos's education? Vivian's shoulders sagged as if she'd been carrying a weight too heavy to bear. Since the beginning of his freshman year. 3 years now. 3 years. The words came out strangled. You've been paying my brother's college tuition for 3 years, and you never thought to mention it. Luis asked me to make sure Carlos could finish his education if anything happened. It was one of his final requests, that no matter what went wrong with the lawsuit, no matter what Kozlov did to him, Carlos would have a chance at the life Luis never got. Zara stood up, so fast her chair fell backward. You've been manipulating us this entire time, playing the long game, making sure we stayed dependent on you. That's not, isn't it? Fury burned through Zara's chest like acid. You let me work double shifts at a diner for 2 years, watching me struggle to save money for Carlos's textbooks while you were secretly paying his entire tuition behind my back. You let me think we were poor, that we were on our own, that nobody cared whether we lived or died. I was protecting you both. If Kozlov had known about the financial connection. Stop lying to me. Zara slammed her hand on the desk, sending papers scattering. Everything you've told me has been a lie or a half-truth. You claim you loved my father, but you let his daughter live in poverty while you played secret benefactor to his son. You say you want justice, but you've been controlling our lives for years without our knowledge or consent. Vivian stood slowly, her ice-blue eyes blazing with something that might have been anger or desperation. I've been keeping you alive. Do you understand that? Kozlov's people have been watching your family since the day Luis died, waiting for any excuse to eliminate loose ends. If I'd given you $18 million overnight, if I'd swooped in as the grieving business partner, you'd both have been dead within a week. So instead you became our puppet master. I became your guardian angel, whether you wanted one or not. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Outside the windows, Austin continued its daily rhythm, unaware that 2 women were fighting over the legacy of a dead man and the future of his children. Zara picked up her phone and called Carlos without breaking eye contact with Vivian. Hey sis, did you get my text about? Carlos, I need you to listen to me very carefully, she interrupted. Where are you right now? In my dorm room, studying for a thermodynamics exam. Why do you sound weird? I need you to pack a bag with essentials only. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Don't use your credit cards. Don't post anything on social media. Can you do that? Zara, you're scaring me. What's going on? She looked at Vivian, who was watching the conversation with growing alarm. Someone's been paying your tuition anonymously for 3 years. Someone who knew Dad before he died. And I think we might all be in danger. Danger from who? I'll explain everything when I see you. Just pack the bag and meet me at. She paused, realizing she didn't know where would be safe. Every place in Austin felt compromised now, watched by people who killed witnesses and corrupted judges. Meet you where? Vivian said quietly. She pulled a keycard from her desk drawer. Presidential Suite, floor 11. It's swept for surveillance daily, and security won't let anyone up without authorization from me personally. Zara hesitated, torn between fury at Vivian's manipulations and the practical reality that she needed allies more than she needed moral purity. The Sterling Grande Hotel, floor 11, presidential suite, she told Carlos. Ask for Vivian Sterling at the front desk. She'll authorize your access. Vivian Sterling? The billionaire? Zara, what the hell is? 1 hour, Carlos. And if you see anyone following you, anyone at all, call me immediately. She ended the call and turned back to Vivian, who was already typing rapidly on her laptop. I'm having my security team do a sweep of the campus, Vivian said. If Kozlov's people have been monitoring Carlos, we'll know within the hour. And if they have, then we accelerate the timeline. Instead of building a careful legal case over months, we go nuclear immediately. Meaning we dump everything we have to every federal agency simultaneously, along with copies to the Washington Post, New York Times, and CNN. Create so much publicity that Kozlov can't make us disappear without triggering a massive investigation. Zara sank back into her chair, the weight of the situation finally hitting her. 24 hours ago, her biggest worry had been paying rent. Now she was planning to expose international organized crime while protecting her brother from professional killers. Why Carlos's tuition specifically, she asked. Why not just give us the money directly? Because Luis was terrified that you'd ask questions about where it came from. He knew you were smart, curious, born to be a journalist. If you'd suddenly had money for college, you'd have investigated until you found the connection to his business dealings. Vivian pulled up what looked like a financial spreadsheet. Carlos was different. Focused on his studies, trusting, willing to accept good fortune without looking too deeply into it. So you've been studying us, learning our personalities, figuring out how to manipulate us. I've been learning how to keep you safe while honoring Luis's wishes. He wanted Carlos to become an engineer, wanted you to become a journalist. The tuition payments kept Carlos on track, and your job at the diner kept you visible but not suspicious. Visible to whom? To Kozlov's watchers. They needed to see that you were just a normal girl working a normal job, not someone with access to millions of dollars or dangerous information. Vivian's expression softened slightly. Every double shift you worked, every bill you struggled to pay, every moment of financial stress, it was all evidence that you didn't know about your father's secret life. The revelation was simultaneously comforting and infuriating. Her poverty had been real, but it had also been protective camouflage, keeping her alive while she grieved in ignorance. And now they know you're asking questions. The confrontation at the diner, meeting with me, Carlos's sudden awareness of the scholarship money, all of it adds up to a pattern they can't ignore. So we're blown. We're exposed. Which means we have maybe 48 hours before they decide we're too dangerous to leave alive. Zara's phone rang, and Carlos's name appeared on the screen. She answered immediately. Are you safe? I think so. But Zara, there's something you need to know. His voice was strained, frightened in a way she'd never heard from her confident little brother. I've been getting weird calls for the past few weeks. Hang-ups, mostly, but sometimes people asking questions about Dad. About what he might have told us before he died. Ice formed in Zara's stomach. What kind of questions? Whether he'd left any paperwork, any business documents. Whether he'd mentioned any names or companies. I thought they were telemarketers or something, but now. His voice trailed off. Now you realize they were intelligence gathering, Vivian said, loud enough for Carlos to hear through the phone. They've been probing to see what Luis might have shared with his children. Who is this? Carlos, this is Vivian Sterling. I was your father's business partner and fiancé. We need to meet immediately to discuss your safety. Silence on the other end of the line. Then Carlos's voice, smaller than before. Dad was engaged? There's a lot we need to explain, Zara said gently. But first, I need to know. Are you sure nobody followed you when you left your dorm? I don't know. I wasn't really looking. Should I have been looking? Vivian was already moving, grabbing her phone and keys. We're coming to get you. Stay exactly where you are. Don't open the door for anyone except hotel security. And if you see anything suspicious, anything at all, call 911 immediately. This is really happening, isn't it? Carlos's voice was barely a whisper. Dad didn't just die in a robbery. He was murdered. Yes, Zara said, the word cutting through her like a blade. And now they're coming for us. As they rode the elevator down to the parking garage, Vivian's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, and her face went pale. What? Zara demanded. My security team just finished their sweep of the UT campus. Vivian showed her the message. 2 surveillance vehicles spotted near the engineering building. Professional surveillance equipment. Subjects appear to be monitoring Carlos Mitchell's movements. They're already there. They've been there for weeks, probably, just waiting for the right moment to make their move. The elevator doors opened onto the parking garage, and Vivian led them toward a black SUV with tinted windows. As she started the engine, her hands were shaking slightly, the first crack in her composed exterior that Zara had seen. Vivian, she said quietly, if something happens to Carlos, nothing is going to happen to Carlos. Or to you. I failed Luis once. I'm not failing his children. But if something does happen, then the people responsible will learn why I built a business empire from nothing. Vivian's ice blue eyes met Zara's in the rearview mirror, and they were hard as winter. They'll learn that some women are dangerous not because they have nothing to lose, but because they have everything to protect. As they pulled out of the garage into Austin traffic, Zara realized that the scared, grieving waitress who'd served coffee at Harper's Diner was gone forever. In her place was someone harder, more focused, driven by the same sense of justice that had gotten her father killed. But maybe that's what it took to fight people like Kozlov. Maybe you had to become dangerous to survive in a dangerous world. And as they raced through the streets toward a confrontation that could save or damn them all, Zara found herself hoping that she was dangerous enough. Would you trust someone who secretly controlled your life for years, even if they did it to protect you? Comment below with your thoughts, because the next chapter brings all the secrets to light in a confrontation that will determine whether the Mitchell family survives or joins Luis in an early grave. And trust me, the truth about who Carlos really is will shock you more than anything that's come before. What if the most dangerous person in your family isn't the one being hunted by killers? What if everything you fought for was always meant to destroy you? They found Carlos in the presidential suite, pacing like a caged animal while room service delivered enough food for a small army. At 21, he was tall and lean like their father, with the same dark eyes and stubborn jawline that had gotten Luis Mitchell killed. But where Luis had carried himself with quiet dignity, Carlos moved with the restless energy of someone who'd been living on borrowed time without knowing it. Zara, he crossed the room in 3 strides and pulled her into a hug that smelled like engineering textbooks and cheap cologne. Thank God you're okay. I've been going crazy since your call. I'm fine, she said, though they all knew it was a lie. None of them were fine. None of them would be fine until this was over. Carlos pulled back and looked at Vivian with curious eyes. So you're the famous Vivian Sterling, Dad's secret fiancée. I'm the woman who loved your father enough to spend 2 years planning revenge against the people who killed him, Vivian replied. And the woman who's going to make sure you both live long enough to inherit the fortune he died protecting. Right? About that. Carlos sat heavily in one of the suite's leather chairs. I need someone to explain to me how my dead mechanic father was secretly a millionaire businessman engaged to a billionaire hotel mogul. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds completely insane. For the next hour, Vivian and Zara took turns explaining the impossible truth. Luis Mitchell's double life, the money laundering investigation, the Kozlov organization, the $18 million trust fund that should have been their inheritance. Carlos listened in stunned silence, occasionally asking questions that proved he'd inherited more of their father's analytical mind than Zara had realized. So let me get this straight, he said finally. Dad discovered that his business partners were washing money for Russian criminals, tried to expose them through a lawsuit, got murdered for his trouble, and left us enough money to live like royalty if we can figure out how to claim it without getting killed. That's the basic situation, yes, Vivian said. And you've been secretly paying my tuition for 3 years while letting Zara think we were poor, all as part of some elaborate protection scheme. Your father asked me to make sure you could finish your education. I've been honoring that promise. Carlos stood up and walked to the windows, staring down at the city where he'd grown up thinking he understood his place in the world. When he turned back, his expression was unreadable. There's something I need to tell you both, he said quietly. Something I probably should have mentioned sooner. Zara felt her stomach drop. What? I haven't just been getting weird phone calls. I've been having meetings. The room went dead silent. Vivian's hand moved toward her purse, probably reaching for a weapon Zara hadn't known she carried. What kind of meetings? Vivian's voice was deadly calm. With FBI agents, Special Agent Patricia Chun and Special Agent Marcus Webb. They approached me 6 months ago, said they were investigating financial crimes connected to Dad's death. They asked if I'd be willing to help. Help how? Zara's voice came out as barely a whisper. By wearing a wire. By getting close to people who might have information about the money laundering operation. Carlos's eyes met hers directly. By getting close to Vivian Sterling. The betrayal hit like a physical blow. Zara stared at her brother. Her baby brother who she'd worked double shifts to support, who she'd sacrificed her own dreams to protect, and saw a stranger. You're working with the FBI, she said numbly. I'm working for justice, Zara. The same thing Dad died trying to achieve. By lying to me. By pretending to be innocent while you were spying on the woman who's been keeping us alive. By trying to catch the people who killed our father. Carlos's composure cracked, revealing the anger underneath. Do you know what it's been like, pretending not to know? Watching you struggle to pay bills while I knew there were millions of dollars sitting in frozen accounts? Watching you work yourself to death in that diner while the people responsible for Dad's murder walked free. Vivian had gone very still, her ice blue eyes calculating distances and escape routes. How much do they know? Everything, Carlos said. The lawsuit, the money laundering, the Kozlov connection, your engagement to Dad. All of it. And your assignment was what, exactly? To gather evidence against me. To gather evidence against everyone involved in the money laundering operation. Including you, if you were complicit. And am I? In your professional opinion? Carlos was quiet for a moment, studying the woman who'd been secretly supporting his education while planning to expose the people who destroyed his family. I don't think you killed Dad, he said finally. But I think you know more about his death than you've told us. And I think you're planning something that's going to get all of us killed. I'm planning to finish what Louise started. To expose Kozlov and recover your inheritance. By going to war with international organized crime. By painting targets on our backs that will never go away, no matter how much money we throw at lawyers and bodyguards. Zara found her voice again. So what's the FBI's plan? What do they want from us? They want us to cooperate with a federal investigation. To testify against everyone involved in the money laundering operation. To help them build cases that will put Kozlov's entire organization in prison for life. And in exchange, witness protection for all of us. New identities, relocation, enough money to start over somewhere safe. Running away, Vivian said with disgust. Hiding for the rest of our lives while the people who killed Louise get reduced sentences for cooperation. Staying alive, Carlos countered. Which is more than Dad managed to do. The argument that followed was brutal, laying bare years of resentment and grief and fear that had been festering beneath the surface. Zara screaming at Carlos for lying to her. Carlos shouting back that he'd been trying to protect her. Vivian coldly calculating the odds of survival under each scenario. It was Zara's phone ringing that finally stopped the fight. Detective Martinez's name appeared on the screen, and she answered without thinking. Miss Mitchell, where are you right now? Why? Because there are federal agents at your apartment with a search warrant, and they're asking questions about your whereabouts. Ice formed in Zara's stomach. What kind of questions? The kind that suggest you're either in serious danger or serious trouble. Possibly both. She looked at Carlos, whose face had gone pale. How long do we have? Before they track your phone to wherever you are? Maybe an hour if you're lucky. And if we're not lucky, then you'd better hope whoever you're with has a very good lawyer. Zara ended the call and looked at the two people who represented her only family. Her brother who'd betrayed her trust and the woman who'd manipulated her life for years. The FBI is coming, she said. We have maybe an hour before they find us. Then it's time to choose, Vivian said. Run with the federal agents and spend the rest of your lives looking over your shoulders, or fight back and take the chance of dying free. Or, Carlos said quietly, pulling a small device from his pocket. We could try a third option. The device was clearly some kind of recording equipment, its red light blinking steadily. You're recording this, Zara said, her voice flat with exhaustion. I've been recording everything since I walked into this room. Every admission, every plan, every piece of evidence you've shared. Carlos's expression was equal parts guilt and determination. The FBI agents downstairs have been listening to the entire conversation. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that Zara almost laughed. Her brother, The person she'd sacrificed everything to protect had been working against her from the beginning. "How long?" she whispered. "Since the phone call started. Since the agents first approached me. I wanted to tell you, Zara, but they said you were safer not knowing." Safer. The word tasted like poison. Like I was safer not knowing Dad was rich. Like I was safer not knowing about the trust fund. Like I was safer not knowing that everyone in my life has been lying to me. "Zara, no." She stood up, moving toward the door. "I'm done. I'm done with the lies, the manipulation, the people who claim to be protecting me while they destroy my life." "Where are you going?" Vivian asked. "To turn myself into the FBI agents downstairs. To tell them everything I know and let them sort it out. They'll never give you the money," Vivian called after her. "The trust fund will be frozen as evidence indefinitely. You'll spend years in legal proceedings, and even if you win, Kozlov's people will have had years to plan your death." Zara paused at the door, her hand on the handle. "And if I help you fight them? Then we have a chance. A real chance to get justice for Luis and security for both of you. By committing federal crimes. By going to war with people who kill families for sport. By finishing what your father started. By becoming the people he raised you to be." The choice hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Trust the federal agents who'd used her brother as a spy, or trust the woman who'd manipulated her life for years while claiming to protect her. What would Luis Mitchell do? The answer came to her with perfect clarity. Her father had chosen justice over safety, truth over comfort, the right thing over the easy thing. And it had gotten him killed. But it had also made him the man worth avenging. "Carlos," she said without turning around. "Turn off the recording device." "Zara, I can't." "Turn it off, or I walk out that door right now and you never see me again." After a moment's hesitation, the red light went dark. She turned back to face them, her traitorous brother and her manipulative stepmother figure, and made her choice. "Tell me the plan," she said to Vivian. "Tell me how we destroy Kozlov without getting ourselves killed." Vivian's smile was sharp as a blade. "We give the FBI exactly what they want. We give them Kozlov's entire organization, wrapped up with a bow and documented down to the last detail. And then we disappear with $18 million and the satisfaction of knowing that the people who killed Luis will spend the rest of their lives in federal prison. And if something goes wrong, then we die fighting instead of living on our knees." Carlos looked between his sister and the woman who'd been supporting his education while planning a war against organized crime. "I can't be part of this," he said quietly. "I won't let you get yourselves killed for money." "This isn't about money," Zara replied. "This is about becoming the people Dad believed we could be. Dad believed I could be an engineer. He believed you could be a journalist. He didn't believe we should be vigilantes fighting Russian mobsters. Dad believed in justice, in standing up for what's right, even when it's dangerous." She met his eyes directly. "If you want to run and hide with the FBI, that's your choice. But I'm going to finish what he started." Carlos stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "If you're really going to do this, then you're going to do it right." He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Agent Chun, it's Carlos Mitchell. I need to meet with you immediately. And I need to know everything, about the Kozlov organization." "Carlos," Zara started. "If we're going to war," he said, "we're going to win. And the only way to win against people like this is with better intelligence, better planning, and better backup than they have." He put the phone to his ear. "Agent Chun, I need to change the terms of our agreement. Instead of gathering evidence against Vivian Sterling, I need to help her destroy the people who killed our father." Outside the windows, Austin continued its daily rhythm, unaware that 3 people were planning to take on an international criminal organization from a luxury hotel suite. But inside that room, the children of Luis Mitchell finally understood what they were fighting for. Not just money, not just revenge, but the chance to honor a man who died believing that some fights were worth having, even if you couldn't win them. And for the first time since this nightmare began, they had a real chance of winning. The final battle is coming. Zara and Carlos Mitchell, armed with federal backing and billionaire resources, are about to take on the organization that destroyed their family. But in a world where judges can be bought and witnesses disappear, will justice be enough to keep them alive? Comment below with your predictions, because this story ends with either triumph or tragedy, and there's no middle ground when you're fighting for your life against people who have nothing to lose. What would you have done in Zara's place? Trust the FBI, trust Vivian, or trust no one at all? The answer to that question might just determine whether the Mitchell family gets their happily ever after or joins their father in an early grave.